welcome to today's episode from the FSP podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the important relationship between sustainability and technology, what it means to be a sustainable organisation, and the benefits of being one. But before we get into the good stuff, I'm going to extend a warm welcome to my lovely guests and ask them to introduce themselves.
Hi, so I'm Holly. I'm a senior BA here at FSP, and sustainability is something that I'm really passionate about and quite opinionated about. So excited to be here.
Hi there, my name's Paul. I'm the CTO at FSP, and I look after all the technical deliveries here at FSP. And like Holly, I'm also passionate about sustainability and talk to quite a few of our clients around how they can use technology more sustainably.
Hey there, I'm James. I'm head of sustainability at a company called Futureproof. So we are FSP's sustainability partner in this space, and I'm here to bring a bit more insight around the wider business strategy of it all.
Thanks all. So I think before we start off, probably the most natural place to start is the word sustainability. I think we hear everywhere at the moment. So I'd like to ask, and I'm going to probably put this question to James, being our sustainable expert in the room, and what do we actually mean by sustainability?
Yeah, Laura, you're right. It's a really broad question. So when we talk around sustainability at Futureproof, the focus is on the UN's broad definition. So it means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Now, what does that actually mean? In 2015, the UN defined some sustainable development goals. So there's 17 of them, and they're really broad. So you're looking at no poverty, no hunger, looking at climate action, you're looking at quality education. So addressing a lot of different things. Now, that's great at a country level because as a country, you can work towards all of that. You've got the necessary departments. It's a public funded kind of situation. Whereas when you're looking at what a company should do, they can't be addressing all of those issues. And also those issues are so big. They're broken down into, I'd say, bite-sized chunks, but even then it can be quite challenging for companies. So the language that companies tend to use is what's called ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. You're looking at that broader spectrum, but you're making it relevant to the commercial landscape.
And how would you define a sustainable organisation?
It's one that is a company is addressing their material issues. So when we talk around material issues, every company is going to look slightly different, and it's different things that they should be addressing. It's the same concept you have when you're looking to make more profit or looking to make more revenue as a company. You identify what are the levers for us to be successful in that, and then you go about addressing them. The material issue is just that, but across the lens of ESG. So you work out, do we need to work on our diversity processes within the company? Do we have a lack of diversity, whether that be gender or ethnicity? Or actually, are we falling behind when it comes to the environmental side? So looking at our carbon footprint, have we even measured it to start with? And is it something we need to be addressing because our industry is quite big polluters? So you identify those pieces and then you start addressing them. And when a company's successful at it, they're addressing that, to quite a large extent.
Yeah, and I think the other really easy way to define a sustainable company is, are you still going to be here in 100 years? Are you still going to be making money, making products, and hopefully having some fun in your business? And I think something that businesses particularly, and it's an interesting distinction to draw between countries and businesses tend to put the economic sustainability at that foundational level. It's embedded. We're not going to do something if it's not profitable, but we don't think about the human sustainability, that social side, and we don't think about environmental sustainability in quite the same way. It's not quite as foundational, I think, anyway.
And I think more broadly, most people, if you ask them what does sustainability mean, they would come up with an environmental definition of it. And I think it's the important is to not lose sight of the social aspects of how are we looking after our communities as well, because we need to make sure that we're having a sustainable impact on every aspect, not just the environment. And clearly businesses, if they want to make money and want to be around for a long time, will also need to have sustainable working practices within their organization. So I think it covers a broad definition, but I think most people would think sustainability tends to lean more towards the environmental aspect, which is at the moment the biggest concern people have.
I think as well, to add to that, a reason it's also coming about is companies are addressing social and have done for a bit of time, because you typically have a people team. When it comes to the environment, you look internally and go, well, who's going to sort this one out? You might have facility managers who, handle invoices, or the finance team, But apart from that, it's a really new thing. So from our perspective, it's not surprising that people align the two together. But at the same time, it does become a bit challenging when you've got to then broaden out the spectrum again, and everyone's like, oh, but we've been measuring our footprints, so we're all good, right? It's like, there's some other stuff to be looking at here as well. But no, it's a good point. There is a big focus at the minute on the environment.
And we should probably also note that environmental sustainability is not just how much carbon you emit, it's how much water you're using, biodiversity of a particular space. So it's not always simple once you even get it down to, we're going to talk about environmental sustainability, to even define that.
And you kind of touched on a really important point there, I think, James, around we've got much more experience with across businesses usually, and the strategy around people and culture is probably thought of more and not seen as closely linked to the sustainable lens around the environment and governance. And I think now that ESG, as you alluded to, environmental social governance, is being put on the agenda of organisations. Sometimes if it's from a purpose-driven perspective, but sometimes it's a legal point of view. And I think there's loads of different aspects. So I just want to get into that a bit more and have a bit of a discussion around, like, what are those key drivers for change? What are the key drivers that businesses should consider? I'm going to go to Holly first.
So I think there's a couple of things here, and I think the main one when we talk about environmental sustainability is we really are speaking about human health. We have hundreds of thousands of deaths every year in the EU from air pollution, which you wouldn't necessarily think. I mean, Delhi's shut schools today because the air pollution in New Delhi is so bad, so we don't necessarily associate European cities as being really bad for air pollution, but they are, and it is having an impact. So for me, number one is always the human health driver. I think the other thing that you've really got to be abreast of is the legislative need. So we do have the Climate Act of 2008 here, which says that we're going to be net neutral by 2050. And then, we've updated that and enshrined it in further legal protections in 2018 as well. So we have to for a health perspective, and we have to because that's been recognised legally. And then there's also corporate competitiveness. So a more efficient organisation is likely to be more sustainable. And then you've also got impacts for brands. So we've seen the power of the green pound. The likelihood of a consumer to buy a product that says something like eco or green on it is much higher than a product that doesn't say that. So it is driving consumer behaviour, and that does create a level of competitiveness between companies. And it's a really valuable thing to be able to say for your brand, particularly with younger people coming into the workforce. We are seeing a lot of Gen Z people saying, actually, I want to go and work for somebody who's purpose-driven and values-driven, and I want to be somewhere that cares about me and about the planet, and I'm not going to apply for a job if they don't. And that's starting to have a really material impact on resourcing and labour hiring as well. So there's a lot in it in terms of drivers, I think.
It's not always easy to see when those words like sustainability or green or eco or organic, if you see that on packaging, I've been guilty of going, oh, okay, I'm saving the planet. My conscience is clear. I'll sleep tonight because I've gone with, the eco-friendly version. It's not really until, as a business, FSP started thinking about our ESG strategy in the proper way, with the help of the likes of yourselves, James, at Futureproof, and to really take a step back and say, well, what does that actually mean? And looking at, and what is their impact, and looking kind of beyond. And it's really hard to see that. But I think now, businesses are having to demonstrate what is the impact rather than talking about it. It's harder to hide from it. Would you say that's true?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more reports that are becoming mandated depending on the size of the organisation. So in the UK, there's a couple that already exist. You've got things like the gender pay gap. A company over a certain size has to disclose their gender pay gap. So from a social perspective, from an environmental perspective, there's a couple of reports. I mean, like most industries, sustainability loves acronyms. So you've got the ESOS and the SECR, which are reports that state what's your carbon footprint across different kind of variables. And then you've got these larger reports coming into fruition across the EU and across the UK as well. So you've got the CSRD across the EU and the SDR across the UK. Larger organisations are going to have to face it first, but it is going to kind of come down. But what it means is companies have to transparently report across a load of metrics. CSRD, there are 1,000 ESG metrics to be reporting on. And the whole purpose of that is to drive transparency. And the first focus is to report, work out what the number is, and then it is to improve that number. So kind of to Holly's point, law and legislation, we're seeing it now come into, the regulatory force as well, that's starting to force companies' hands to be addressing things that previously they've, I'd say deprioritized. It's probably the best phrase.
Yeah, and I think it's still one of the challenges is that whilst there's regulation to compel people to report, and there's more of that coming, there isn't an awful lot compelling people to do something about it. You can say what your emissions are, and that at least makes it transparent. But then what are you doing about it? Do you have a credible reduction plan in place? And what's good actually is at the moment we're starting to be asked that by some of our clients is what is your reduction plan to go along with that? And I think that's a really good thing, but there's nothing that formalizes that at the moment that says you need to report it in this way and you need to have a reduction plan formatted in this particular way as well. I think it's just down to individual organizations to say, how are we going to do this? And when would we like to get to net zero, for example? But the more that we do in this space, I think the better it is, because it's not just what is it, it's what are you doing about it that's really important.
That was really interesting, and that is also echoed by the sort of national level approach as well, where we did have the case of the government being taken to court because, okay, we've said we're going to reduce the target, but actually the plan to do that is completely ineffective. So I think it'll be interesting to see as we have more maturity in this space, what those kind of governance guardrails are that determine, okay, what is actually a good plan, and how do we assess that that number is accurate, that you're going to get down to that target.
They've got so one of the reporting frameworks is the ESOS one, and the focus around that is energy saving. That's kind of the reason it came about, the energy saving scheme. And they have now started to introduce, so by May 2025, companies for the first time have to show a valid action plan. However, it's not expanded across, decades, it is 3 years. Like, what are you going to do in the next 3 years? And it's showcasing the reduction of energy and assigning budgets and timelines to that. The challenge, again, is, okay, well, now we've got a plan in place, but how well enforced is it going to be? What happens if we don't actually meet these targets? Are we going to see any financial penalties? Are we going to see any backlash at all? I mean, it's fairly unknown, the actual ESOS action plan. So as a result, I doubt there's going to be any kind of effect on brand reputation, for example, if you didn't hit it. The bigger backlash is if you're assigned to larger certifications, so like the SBTI, which is like the gold standard of net zero. But even then, it might be business to business backlash, but you're not necessarily going to get it from a consumer front because it's still quite a niche piece of knowledge to know. So if you're not doing well at it, not many people would maybe understand.
And that probably really underscores the difference between, we were talking about earlier about financial sustainability and environmental sustainability, and profit is in no way a bolt-on. It's embedded into everything. But everything that you've just said there makes it so clear that actually all of the environmental stuff is a bolt-on. Even the way that we advertise jobs for it, a head of sustainability. We don't have necessarily a head of profit. It's just something that everybody knows that they need to do.
100%, yeah. The way to take proper action is to, embed it into your job descriptions, and therefore the ball never gets dropped because someone's always responsible. But it's not for the whole thing. It's just for really small elements that all compound up to making something a bit more meaningful.
It's interesting.
I like how you articulated it there about the likeness of profit as well, and it's just kind of embedded, and ultimately it's the result at the end of doing all this stuff, which kind of leads us nicely into our next piece that I wanted to discuss around how can businesses think about sustainability as part of their future tech strategies, and let's explore that relationship a bit more and how that can be an accelerator to being a sustainable organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sustainability, and we would talk about, when we talk about digital transformation, we tend to talk about that in the sense of it's creating a digital first mindset. So getting people to think about digital technology as the default rather than, oh, should we digitize this later? And I think that's probably embedded in most organizations now. But sustainability isn't. And we talk about, well, you want a sustainability first mindset. It isn't an afterthought, it's just part of what you do. And then when technology specifically, I think there's different lenses of the way you look through that. There's things like sustainability in technology. So that's how do we make sure that we use technology efficiently. So yeah, there is a carbon footprint of how much storage space you have. How big is your email inbox? It's in the cloud, people tend to forget about it, but there is a carbon footprint of that. So encouraging people to think about, well, how much am I storing? That's kind of sustainability in technology. Then you've got sustainability of technology. So that's how do we go about building technology sustainably? So then you can kind of think about in terms of, the efficiency of the code that you write and how much memory and how much CPU you use, because that will directly impact how much electricity you need to use it. And then lastly, you've got things like technology for sustainability. And that's things like Futureproof is an example of that, James's company, where they're actually helping organizations by offering a technology product to help measure and track your emissions and then ultimately make your organization more sustainable as a result. But then you obviously got the stuff that people probably are familiar with, like automatically turning off lights and just kind of simple timer-based stuff. So I think there's different lenses in which you can kind of look at it. And if you're an organization such as James's organization, then you're building the technology with a specific purpose in mind. I think for the vast majority of the organizations, they're going to be thinking about sustainability in technology. What's the technology I'm using and how can I use it more sustainably?
And what is the relationship with, dare I say it, AI? It will be, because it is the theme now. I think you hear sustainability everywhere, you hear AI everywhere, and there's an important relationship with those as well. So what I guess it would be good to explore about what is the challenges that AI can bring, and to be mindful while organizations are also thinking about what is their future AI strategy. But actually it's probably not okay, your sustainability over here, AI over here, cyber over here.
Yeah.
It's very interconnected. And how should organizations be thinking about getting ahead of what the risks might be with that? Do you mind, Paul, just expanding a bit on that?
Yeah, sure. So AI at the end of the day, and particularly the stuff that's in the headlines at the moment in terms of generative AI and the likes of OpenAI and ChatGPT, it's a general purpose technology. So it kind of applies across all of those three kind of buckets that I just outlined. So you still got to think about how do we use it sustainably. You kind of, if you're going to be building something using that technology, you've got to think about sustainability in AI. And then there's obviously AI itself, or technology for sustainability. So, I mean, there's lots of stats out there at the moment, but things like ChatGPT, and this was going back over a year ago now, they say it would need to drink the equivalent of half a litre of water if you were having a 50 chat message conversation with it. So as you're kind of pinging forwards messages backwards and forwards with it, it's having to consume roughly half a litre of water in terms of cooling. So because of the amount of processor power required to power these models, particularly generative AI, they are not efficient compared to other forms of technology. So they just consume massive quantities of electricity to actually use them. And then as an association, water, as Holly was saying, is not just electricity, not just carbon. There is a water kind of consideration as well, which is opaque to most people. You don't even really think about it. So there's that on one end, and we can't just say don't use it. And I always say it's all about awareness, not avoidance. So it's not saying you can't possibly use this technology because it's so damaging. I mean, it isn't, but you just need to be aware of it.
Be aware of what it's going to consume, but if you can do that in a more sustainable way, do that.
Absolutely, but then you look at it from an efficiency perspective. We've already said a sustainable organisation is an efficient organisation. So if you're using it to make your organisation more efficient, then yes, it has a cost and it has an impact. but they can also have a really positive benefit because it can be taking effort out elsewhere and ultimately making you more efficient. So it's not to say, I guess my point being, you can't say AI has or technology has no footprint. It has a cost, it has an impact. There are carbon emissions associated with it. There's no getting away from it. It may actually be more efficient than what you're currently doing, in which case it's a good thing. Use it, crack on. But it may also increase your emissions as well if you do so unsustainably. And if you are trying to build your own model in this particular way, again, there is an impact of doing that. And I think most organizations need to factor that in, because if your organization is trying to get to net zero and reduce their emissions, but you're not even considering the impact that the technology you're using, and let's face it, technology's adoption is increasing, then that's potentially a big black hole that you haven't even considered that could be a factor for your organization.
And I think the other thing to sort of say with that is AI is really useful and really good at pattern recognition and data analysis. What it's not so good at is you asking it, how am I going to make my company net zero, and it giving you a sensible answer. So it's no substitute for the creativity and the originality of human thought. But if you have got a huge amount of data, maybe you've passed a load of data about how you're using different tools, sets across your business, and you want to analyze that to find efficiencies and synergies, really great use for it. But for me, I always think it's a bit funny when you have people who, I asked AI how to do that. Yes, did you? And what did it tell you? Got to be a little bit careful, I think. But the other thing I would say about technology in businesses and in terms of sustainability is there's so much stuff going on. It's not just AI, there are so many different innovations coming from all over the world. So as much as technology has a cost, and roughly at a global level, it's about the same as aviation. So about 3% of global carbon comes just from data, never mind, mining the metals to make the computers and whatnot. That's just data storage. But that's not to say that technology has no part in sorting all of this out. There are companies now who are starting to use AI-powered lasers instead of pesticides to do weeding. We've got companies who are making plastic out of seaweed, farmed seaweed. So technology can give us an awful lot of stuff, but it's just, using it in the right way to answer the right questions and being sensible about it, as Paul says, being mindful of how much water it's going to drink.
Mm. If we're going to use these, people are going to use it anyway. Mm. So actually, then use it sustainably. If we're going to use it sustainably. And where do organisations start? Where should they start thinking about, okay, where am I going to put my efforts first?
Yeah, I think that it's quite hard to definitely understand, and I feel a lot of sympathy for companies. We get them coming in all the time with different requests, and it's always like, this is the end goal. But we're not quite sure where to go from here, or what position do we start with, what sort of policy should we adjust first, or how do we go about measuring our carbon footprint. The biggest thing I think to focus on is don't necessarily think about the end goal. It's more a case of what's the biggest difference your company could make. We call them material assessments. So understanding your material issues as a company, everyone's going to have slightly different ones. And then you just kind of break that down into bite-sized pieces, make it really manageable and start working through them. Again, it's going to be addressing ESG across that space. Yeah, so going off the materiality assessment, it's then just as an individual within the company, identifying maybe you're not running the company, maybe you are in middle management somewhere. And if you can't necessarily address the company's issues, just understanding what could your department do a bit better? What sort of things are out there for you to be doing as an individual that's going to make a meaningful impact? Speaking from personal experience, that was kind of the position I was in my old job. I was a middle manager in an advertising firm, and kind of my response was, well, I want to try and do something here and just start doing that kind of internal piece. Becoming an ESG team lead or setting up a green team or whatever it may be, which is just raising a little bit more awareness for kind of the issues that are out there. And then it starts that conversation. One of the biggest positives that a company could do is just start a conversation, whether that be with your customers, with your suppliers, any other stakeholders you're working with, to understand what maybe they're doing as well and what you could maybe piggyback off the back of to give you a bit of a boost and a bit of momentum. And then once that kind of snowball starts rolling, it just picks up speed. That's what we've seen from our experience. When a company starts, taking action, the path is pretty clear for them down the line. It's just the hardest thing is starting, essentially.
Yeah, and the stakeholder piece, I think, is really interesting point to maybe expand on, because I think from what I can see, the different areas matter to different stakeholders. What our customers care about necessarily won't be what our employees will be caring about, as will the investors in organisations will be thinking something different and wanting something different. So I think we're seeing much more, during interviews and stuff, people they're asking like us the questions, what are you doing to impact the environment? And I guess it's a good assessment piece to see, I want to be part of that organisation because I care about those things as well. Or actually, I don't care about that. That's not the organisation for me. And they're probably not the right people for us then. But also customers as well. And I think sometimes it might be hard for organisations to, win the hearts and minds of people with sustainability and what is to be done versus what has to be done. Because they're being told, we've got this new legislation coming in, you've got to provide all this data, and actually you're just providing the data rather than actually, you're not getting told, okay, you're doing well, or you're doing great. It's just great, you're capturing it. So what's the impact there? And how do you kind of navigate all of those different stakeholders?
It's a really good point, and there are so many different stakeholders there. It can be quite hard to identify where to start. It comes down to inevitably prioritization. So work out what stakeholder is most impactful to our business, and it doesn't have to be one. It could be a myriad of them. There's some stats around from an employee's perspective. There was an assessment done where 74% of employees were willing to quit their job if sustainability or mental health wasn't taken seriously. And then you look from a private equity standpoint. So if investment is really big for you as a company, starting to address ESG within your company to help private equity understand that you're more valuable than a company doing exactly the same thing that isn't addressing ESG. From some of the portfolios that we've been working with, we're seeing valuations drastically increase, like double-figure percentage increases just by addressing ESG, not doing anything radical within their business, just focusing upon that. And some investment firms have now come up and said, if we invest in you, within 2 years, you have to set a net zero strategy and be working on it. So it comes down to really understanding what is a big focus for us. Again, if it's getting more sales and you're working in a B2B landscape, start reviewing the tender processes. There's about 91% of tenders coming in have ESG requirements now baked in them. So as soon as a company can sit down and go, right, here's our stakeholders, what are the requests coming in from each of these? They can again start to address them and go, well, maybe we should focus here and put our efforts here to start with. You mentioned, yes, reporting is kind of the first thing that comes through, but down the line, it's going to be, well, how have you got better? It's the reporting is very much the first thing. Let's set a baseline, and then you have to get better. If you're not getting better and you just stick with your baseline, you are going to get left behind by other organizations.
I think it's a really interesting point about the valuation of businesses potentially doubling. I mean, that's massive amounts of money potentially. And for me, I'm often sort of labouring under the misconception that actually sustainability is somewhat at odds, or environmental sustainability can be somewhat at odds with a truly capitalist mindset, which obviously asks us for growth in perpetuity for always, which, as we know from a sustainability and resource management, there aren't infinite resources for forever. But that statistic alone does a nice job of proving that actually sustainability is not at odds with shareholder value. It's not at odds with current economic realities. And to circle back again to an efficient business is a sustainable one, it further proves that if you appeal to your investor base, if you appeal to your stakeholders, your customers and your suppliers, and you're mindful about how you're using tech and where you can grab some costs and get rid of them and do them in a more sustainable way, we can all make the profit that we need to make. We can all appease our investors and be environmentally sustainable. And I think sometimes we forget that a bit and we think of it, it's a cost. It's going to cost us to be sustainable. No, it's not. It's gonna make people more money.
100%. It's the best way to view it is as an investment.
Yeah.
And the biggest cost, I mean, you alluded to earlier, greenwashing. If you put your foot in it, that's going to significantly cost you, whether it be, a financial penalty, brand reputation, whatever it may be. So companies are also starting to identify that and understand, well, we've got to be squeaky clean. The issue then is called green hushing, which essentially is bury your head under the sand, don't mention anything. Neither of those approaches work. You got to talk about it, and then you've got to be transparent in terms of where you are. And I think the hardest thing for organizations is just being honest and saying, we're in this position, we're wanting to get better. That's one thing that you had in your last impact report that was brilliant, was this is where we're currently at and here's our objectives. Companies don't often like to kind of share that information, saying, we know we're not perfect and there's things that we need to be addressing. Typically, in a financial report, it's just profit and loss, or here's our revenue. And, you depending on the size of your company, you state strategy. But you don't often state, where your falters have been or where you made a mistake last quarter when it came to your community strategy, or why didn't you raise the money you had intended to in the last annual report. So that kind of is creating new conversations and a new dynamic for companies to be juggling with of, it's okay not to be perfect, but we do need to talk about it.
It's much more human, isn't it, that language, than corporate. It's okay not to be okay is a very human thing, I think.
Yeah, and it scares the hell out of board of
I bet it
directors.
does.
Yeah.
I think it helps create accountability for ourselves and also for other organisations to hold you accountable, or for our customers to hold us accountable, because I think it is quite bold, like putting it out there to say, look, here's where we are. We're not perfect. We know we've kind of identified that these are the areas we need to work on, but we're going to work on them, and then evidence those, because you can only say these things are only going to get you so far before you do. But the return on investment stuff I thought was really interesting, because you do need to invest in becoming a sustainable organisation, whether it be with a tech lens or a reduction lens or whatever. But actually, how do you quantify? We've kind of touched on some of them already, but I guess what are the investment that you can quantify versus the ones you can't? I guess the people piece and retention rates could be many factors, but that might be one of them. How can we quantify that?
It's definitely a challenge to quantify it. The easiest piece to do is kind of the stakeholder analysis with customer bases. So essentially, are you unlocking more tenders by having more criteria in place that's allowing you to speak to more companies? One example of that is the likes of Cisco, Tesco, Unilever. To become one of their largest suppliers, you have to get in the door, show your emission data. So if you weren't measuring that before, you wouldn't even be able to have a conversation with them. We've had some clientele that have been able to achieve certifications, and although it wasn't the be all and end all, one of the key criteria was you clearly care about this. Therefore, it's one of the reasons we awarded you the contract. It's really hard to put a number on it, and especially because it's a long-term play that companies need to see. And apart from maybe unlocking a couple of tenders, you might not see much return in the short term, which can often be seen as sustainability as a cost. But if you can bake it in for the longer term, you look at the likes of Patagonia as a brand. They are world-renowned and a very loved company because they have been doing it repeatedly, non-stop, to the point now where they are pretty much owned by a trust that's been given to the trust to own, to make sure that the values are kind of kept intact as well. But that's kind of where we're at with that.
So the three main areas which I'm getting from what all we're talking about: measure, invest, utilize technology. Sorry, 4. 4, because the main one, I guess, is reduction. That's what kind of a core focus needs to be. And so just going back to technology, how can technology help us to do all of those things on a large scale?
On a large scale?
On a large scale.
Well, I think utilising technology across all those three areas. I mean, clearly we need to be looking at technology that can help us reduce emissions. And I think James's company's technology future-proof, that allows you to kind of help with measurement, and then that greater awareness hopefully then leads to, well, we can see where the emissions are. Now we can target them more effectively. I think within your organization, we've spoken about it before in terms of a sustainable organization is an efficient organization. So you want to be following the consumption. So if you can't figure out exactly how much emissions one technology happens to be emitting, for example, well, just do the simple thing of kind of say how much data are we storing, or how many servers are we happen to be running. So, and physically, where are they in the world? It can make a massive difference if you happen to be running a server in the UK versus perhaps running them in a slightly more efficient country, such as Norway. So the Nordic countries tend to have a much lower carbon footprint of their national grid. So the carbon intensity is that much lower. So you can kind of look at it and think, well, actually cloud technology then enables that, because you get more choice about where do you physically put your servers, your data. You could choose a region of the world that might actually be more efficient for you. So I think technology can kind of help in lots and lots of different ways, and scale there is, you've got global scale, you can choose different regions there. So it's all about kind of using it more effectively, but I would always say follow the consumption. Where are you using things? So look for technology that can actually report to you more effectively how much it's being used, because if you can then hopefully try to reduce that usage over time, then you know that you're going to be more efficient. And it's not necessarily reducing it in totality. It's about reducing it in terms of whatever metric makes sense for your organization. So it could be based on the number of employees. So if you're a growing organization and you're recruiting more people, your emissions are naturally going to increase. But if you can be more efficient with the amount of emissions per employee, for example, then you know as an organization you're kind of heading in the right direction.
Right. And I think if you want to talk even bigger scale, like country scale, about technology helping us, one of the things that I always find quite interesting to read about is the technology as a mitigator to effect. So Tokyo has, I only recently saw the pictures, but there are massive chasms under Tokyo. The Japanese government spent $2 billion, and it's to capture floodwaters. It's just a flood discharge thing. So it's not super high tech, but it is technology, and it is being used to mitigate the risk of flooding in Tokyo, and it's been used effectively for the past 20 years or so. We've also got a carbon scrubber that's being built in Texas as we speak, that's going to be taking 500,000 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere a year. And there are so many more. So on a big scale, on a global scale, to actually fix the problem, there's lots of stuff happening, and it's all good, exciting stuff. And it's always really nice to see every couple of years there'll be a kid at their science fair and they've discovered something, and it's really building a lot of innovation, I think, and there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of intent to find good, honest solutions using technology. So there's always great new engineering happening.
I think that's a really good point, because if you give people a goal or an objective, and then that's the sort of thing that can encourage innovation, because you're like, how can we get there? So if the goal is to reduce, then can people think more innovatively about that? And we know that, surveys have shown that sustainability and trying to reduce emissions, for example, is more motivational to people than just trying to save money. If an organization is kind of setting a goal saying, well, we need to reduce our emissions, people will look to find innovative ways to do that, more so than they would do and just saying, oh, we want to save the company a few quid. So there's an interesting way of kind of saying, actually, it is an investment, and it can actually lead to greater innovation as a result.
And with that as well, it's the unsettling thing of setting a target and publicly stating it with zero idea on how you're going to achieve it as well. So the aviation industry as a whole set a net zero target. So that means reducing their emissions by 90%. Well, they need brand new technology to come in to work out how you can fly a plane without the use of kerosene. Whether that be through, some form of battery power that's using, totally green energy or whatever it may be. But they publicly stated it, saying that as an industry, we're going to do this. And then it kind of raises the challenge to companies to come around and say, okay, well, we think we can fix the problem. Because again, understanding that the landscape we're in, there are commercial benefits to solving those problems. You will benefit massively financially if you can work out how to fix that problem as well. So industries getting together and collectively saying, right, this is our target as well, allows opportunity for entrepreneurs to come in. And, that kind of schoolboy analogy at the science fair is great, because it's, here's a new challenge, who can rise to it and create something new, because you will benefit commercially as well.
So there's a pressure for the future for us to actually, the targets we've committed to achieve. And also it's exciting also for the future, because I'd love to, my children, they will hold me accountable, and they'll be like, Mummy, why have you not rinsed that out and put that in the recycling? Or that doesn't go in that bin. If I'm being a bit lazy, which I'm not anymore. But they also, so when they love coming to our FSP offices, and they love, they always comment, and oh my God, you've got so many bins, and why do you not do this at home, all these bins? And we put our plastic wrappers straight in the bin. Okay, girl, sorry, I'm trying. But I think it's great, and I love seeing, what it means through the next generation's eyes as well. And I think that's really exciting. So I'm going to ask you all, I'm putting you on the spot, but what are your predictions, from a business perspective, if we look for it through a business lens, but what is predictions for the next 5 years? Where's it going?
I think we'll see an increase in the politicisation of the issue. I think we'll see more legislation coming through, more governance, more rigour around all of that. But I also think we'll start to see the difference in burden being asked of companies in the UK, for example, versus somewhere like India. I mean, the UK does not have a large global carbon footprint. India's in the top 3. It's also in the top 3 for population, so you can kind of see why. But for a business here to say, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to reduce my carbon footprint is perhaps a different undertaking than for a business in Mumbai. And there's still a lot of development in different areas of the world. So how can we get that technological leapfrogging to those areas to enable people to have all the opportunities that we've had in the West and still be able to do it sustainably? So I think it's going to get, as we get closer to the crunch point, a bit more political, I would hazard.
I think we'll see more being imposed on organisations to do something about it and to be more prescriptive, and it will get tighter and tighter in terms of what's required of them. I know there's always going to be levels at which some of those things apply, but we know that as soon as something applies at a large organisation, it gets filtered down to small organisations being asked to, what are your emissions and what's your plan to reduce it? So I think we'll probably see more and more of this coming through. And if you've got the information to hand, and it's already publicly available on your website, you're already being transparent about your objectives and your progress towards it, then I think a lot of the battle is there, because you're actually able to say, we're already doing this. And I think probably linked to that, you'll probably start to see more organisations trying to one-up each other in terms of it then becomes a little bit of a competitive edge in terms of how far along the journey to net zero are you happening to be, or what are the things that you've done and what are the good news or stories you're allowed to shout about. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit kind of optimistic, but that's certainly what I'd like to see over the next 5 years.
Well, we are seeing, a data boom, data, and that's how you can ultimately get insights and drive change. So thanks, Paul.
I think to be maybe even more optimistic, Paul, I think in the next 5 years, one of the key things that will be coming into place is companies that have started to set kind of the really large net zero targets, they'll actually have to be meeting their near-term targets. So the benefit of that is if they are succeeding, they would have actually started to paint roadmaps for other companies to follow. So kind of the smaller companies, organisations that are starting to get pressure from their customer base, for example, will have a clearer view of, okay, this is how we're going to go about achieving this as well. So hopefully it becomes a bit clearer for companies with the likes of that as well. Hopefully the green pound strengthens in essence, so it becomes more affordable for organisations to be doing that, whether that is through increased subsidies, hopefully not the other way around, where it's just increasing the cost of something that's more fossil fuel intensive, to try and drive those actionable changes as well. So I'd like to see those two things happen over the next 5 years.
Thanks, James. So just to finish us off, because I think we could go all night kind of talking around everything. But if you could give one piece of advice to someone listening, what would that be? Paul, I'll go to you first.
I keep going back to this phrase. A sustainable organisation is an efficient organisation.
It's a very nice phrase.
If you're looking to make a change, then follow the consumption. Mm-hmm. If you can't think of anywhere else to start, to the sort of James's point around, if you happen to be someone in an organisation and you're not quite sure what the organisation's priorities are, but you still want to make a difference, follow the consumption, and that can be in terms of storage used, or electricity consumed, or time spent. Chances are, if you're spending an awful lot of time on something, it's probably having an impact. So be more efficient, and you'll ultimately be moving in the right direction. Yes, there's other things that need to come along in terms of reporting and analysis and tracking and all that kind of good stuff, but you can still start and make a difference now.
Mm-hmm. James, what would you say? What's your piece of advice?
I think building on what Paul said there around the focus for organisation is consumption. Also thinking around, remember sustainability is a broad topic. You're not going to have all the answers, but work out what is, we kept calling it material, but what is most relevant to you as an organisation. Where's the biggest driver for you making money as an organisation? Well, I understand what's the most sustainable company or version of us doing right now, and how can we do that as a business? Copying someone is a brilliant place to start in terms of identifying what are they doing that we're not, because ultimately that's giving them a competitive advantage. And it will snowball. We do see it with organisations all the time. You've got to make it a bit more bite-sized, just so you can start going, and it will snowball into something that's pretty cool to see, especially from my side, as I get to sit back and see all the amazing work that you guys have already achieved.
Thanks, James. Holly, what's your last piece of winning advice?
I'm always reminded of the Chinese proverb, which is one of my favourites, and it goes as thus: the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago, and the second best time is today. So just start small, don't get overwhelmed, don't worry about it, the tree will grow. And it already is. We've already reduced by about 50%, I think, in this country from 1990 levels. So it can be overwhelming. There is an awful lot going on in it. It can be difficult to see what to do at a company level. How are we going to make this company sustainable? Don't worry, one step at a time.
Oh, I love that. And I'm going to end it there on that lovely, calm note. So thank you all for joining the podcast today. Thank you for everyone watching or listening. We hope you've enjoyed it, and please look out for some of our other episodes on lots of range of different topics. And if you'd like to see more of these conversations, then please do let us know. We love talking about this type of stuff. So thank you.